After the British government announced that Britain was handing off its obligations as mandatory to the newly formed United Nations, the UN sent a committee to Palestine. The committee's recommendations became UN Resolution 181, also known as the Partition Plan. According to the plan, the remaining territory of the Mandate for Palestine was to be divided into a Jewish state and another Arab state. The Jewish leaders were divided over Resolution 181, but they voted to accept it. Arab leaders rejected the plan, declaring that they would defeat the Jews in battle and establish an Arab state in all of Palestine. After the UN vote on November 29, 1947 to partition Palestine, a civil war broke out between Arab and Jewish militias. Arab forces fought to liberate all of Palestine from the Jews, and Jewish forces fought to secure the territory allotted to them under the Partition Plan. A full-scale war was on the horizon. On May 14, 1948, the British completed the withdrawal of their armed forces from Palestine, and Israel declared its independence. The next day, Arab armies from the states of Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Egypt attacked Israel. In contradiction to their leaders' public statements about Arab unity and defending Palestinian Arabs, Jordan and Egypt pursued their own territorial ambitions. As a result, Jewish militias fought back and captured territory promised to them under the Mandate for Palestine and the UN Partition Plan. But by the end of the 1948 war, the territory held by Israel and the Arabs was not consistent with the UN's plan. In early 1949, Israel and the Arab rulers signed an armistice agreement. The 1949 Armistice Line, also called the Green Line, has become one of the most significant dividing lines in the history of the Middle East. It divides Palestine into Israel and the territory now called the West Bank, which is the name given to the area by the Jordanians who captured it in 1948. To understand much of what's behind the failures to achieve peace, one has only to look at how each side frames the 1948 war. For the State of Israel, 1948 is commemorated as a war of independence for the Jewish people after 2,000 years of displacement, dispersion, and persecution. For Arabs, the 1948 war is Al-Nakba, Arabic for the catastrophe. It represents the defeat of the Arab armies, the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs, and the cause of the Palestinian refugee problem. Who bears responsibility for the Palestinian refugees has become one of the most hotly debated topics in the Arab-Israeli conflict. According to the UN, roughly 700,000 Palestinian Arabs who lived in Israel before 1948 fled beyond the 1949 Armistice Line during the fighting and became refugees. Arab leaders hold Israel fully responsible. They argue that Israel had a plan to drive Palestinian Arabs from their towns and villages in order to reduce the number of Arabs that would remain in the territory that was to become the Jewish state after the war. And the Arab leaders demand that Israel grant the refugees their right to return to their homes. Israel holds that the Palestinian refugee problem was a result of the war started by the Arabs after their leaders rejected the UN Partition Plan. And Israel believes that the Arabs should take responsibility for the Palestinian refugees living in their countries. Israel argues that the 1948 war brought about a Jewish refugee problem when over 800,000 Jews were driven out of Arab countries after the Arab armies were defeated. Israel absorbed most of those Jewish refugees and says that the Arab state should do the same for the Palestinian refugees. Last, Israel holds that only those Palestinians who fled in 1948 should be considered refugees. Currently, the UN Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA, the organization that provides relief for the Palestinian refugees, considers all descendants of male Palestinians who fled in 1948 eligible for refugee status. UNRWA's definition does not apply to any other refugee population. It is a definition that has resulted in over 5 million people qualifying for Palestinian refugee status under UNRWA, when in fact the number of actual refugees from 1948 is by now, almost 70 years later, less than the 700,000 it was originally. Israel believes that a person should not be considered a refugee from a country that he or she has never lived in, and that most of the UNRWA refugees should be considered citizens of the states that they were born in and or reside in. Israel viewed 1948 as the War of Independence, but the Arabs viewed 1948 as the War of Catastrophe and sought to avenge their defeat. It's no surprise then that the 1948 war was not the end of the hostilities between the Arab states and the newly formed State of Israel.
If you would like to explore more hot topics, our companion book is available at major online booksellers. You can also support the production of future For Critical Thinkers videos or download complimentary resources for teachers by visiting forcriticalthinkers.com.